Hello, dear students. In our lesson today, we're going to deal with some reading comprehension. More specifically, we'll talk about art, music, theater. Before doing our reading, we're going to revise some of the vocabulary that we've learned about this very interesting field. So, we have art, books, film and theater, media, and music. And we're given some words, as we can see, and we have to put them in the appropriate field. Okay, that's very easy, so please, let's do the exercise together. First of all, we have the word art gallery. In which field should we put this word? It refers, of course, to art. Let's go to the next one, ballet. Once again, we're talking about art. What about band? How many times we've talked about bands, we've talked about music bands. I know that you can think of many of those. Let's go to the next one. So, a bestseller. When we're talking about books, of course, we're talking about bestsellers. So, those books that are widely read from readers and are sold a lot. Let's move on. The next word is costume. When we're talking about theater, when we're talking about actors and we refer to costumes, we're talking about the clothes, of course, that the actors wear while they are on stage. Let's move on to the next one. We're talking about documentaries, and of course, we're talking about films. So, think of your favorite documentary that you've seen lately. Let's move on. Our next word is hit. Think of the hit. Think of that word that is based on music, and that is one of those songs that has been widely heard from the listeners, from the audience. Our next word, picture. Of course, pictures. How many pictures, how many photos we can see that refer, of course, to the art. Our next word, stage. Where do the actors perform when they are in a theater? Of course, they perform on a stage. So the place that they play all those acts. TV presenter, we're talking about the people that are where. Think, where do they present? Of course, when they are in different shows. So we're talking about the media. And our last word, the writer. Where do we find writers? When we're talking about books, of course. So, the writer of a book. Now, apart from the vocabulary that we just saw, we're going to continue with some more words. But before that, let me ask you a question. How do you like to study? Take a look at this girl. What do you think? She is studying on her own. Now, maybe some people like studying alone. Some other people like being with others. Some others maybe like listening to music or being in their bedroom or in the living room. It doesn't matter. Every single person has its own style. So you might be like this girl or a different one. Since we talked about how different people like to study, we are going to see now how different writers have their own habits. How do they like, how do they prefer to write nowadays, or why not in the past as well? So, our reading is going to be based on that. We're going to see some vocabulary together, and why not, we're going to discover different ways that people used to write in the past. So their habits may be strange, may be normal, we'll see together. Okay, let's start reading. Writers have very clear preferences about where and how they write. For instance, So, for example, some writers like to have people around them and background noise, so they don't mind if they have some noise from different people or from music. But others prefer isolation, so they want to be on their own, they want to be alone. Novelist and journalist Ernest Hemingway used to write standing up. So as we can see, the novelist, so the person that used to write novels, this is a novelist. And a journalist as well. And why is he a journalist? Because he used to write in different newspapers. He used to write articles. So he wrote standing up. We can see him. He didn't like being sat, but that was his own way of writing, standing up. D.H. Lawrence wrote under a tree. Can we see here? So another way of writing, another habit of writing. And Jane Austen, author of romantic fiction, wrote on a small table in her family living room. So we saw 3 different ways, 3 different habits of 3 different people. Maybe you are in the habit of one of those 3. Let's move on. Children's author and poet Roald Dahl sat in a very old armchair in a shed, and French novelist Marcel Proust wrote in bed. So, on the one hand, we can see the author. Who is an author? A person that writes books. So, the author that used to sit, as we can see, in a very old chair. Where? In a shed. Do you know what's a shed? Those small, let's say, houses usually are wooden, where every single one can be on his own in an isolation, let's say. So this is how Roald preferred to write. On the other hand, we have Marcel Proust that wrote in bed, as we can see. And why is that? That was his own way. This is how he had the inspiration, let's say. Okay, let's move on. Graham Greene, author, playwright, and literary critic, used to write only in the morning. So, we have 3 characteristics here. He was an author, so he used to write books. He was a playwright, so he used to write the plot, let's say, for the play, so for the theater. And he was a literary critic, so he used to write what? Book reviews. And what was special about him? He only wanted to write in the morning. This is how he had the inspiration, in the morning. And listen to something strange as well. After 500 words, he stopped, even in the middle of a sentence. So, let's say he counted the words, and when he was in the 500th word, he used to finish. Why is that? That was his habit. Let's move on. I'm sure you recognize the author. Who is that? Can you think of? I'm sure you know Harry Potter. So this is the author of Harry Potter. Let's go and read and see what is strange about her actually. Nicholson's Cafe in Edinburgh became famous because J.K. Rowling sat there and wrote some chapters of her first best-selling fantasy novel. What did we say? A best-selling is a book that is widely sold, that many readers like to read about it. So, she wrote Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. She used to sit at the same table, drinking coffee and writing in a notebook with her baby asleep in her pushchair. So that was one of the ways that she used to like writing. Let's move on. Most novelists write alone, but script writers, so the one that write the scripts about serious, let's say, and songwriters, so those people that write the lyrics, the words for songs, often write together. A team of 7 writers wrote scripts each week for the popular American sitcom Friends. I'm sure that you've all heard of Friends and the situational comedy. So a sitcom is a situational comedy. Lennon and McCartney wrote 180 songs together for Beatles. Perhaps the strangest of all was classical composer Beethoven. He was completely deaf. So, deaf means that he couldn't hear. He was deaf. And although he was deaf, he was a composer. So, what did he do? He used to write song. When he wrote the famous Ninth Symphony, he took the legs off his piano, as we can see. Where are his legs? They are on the floor, and felt the vibrations of the music through the floor. So, he was deaf, we said. He couldn't hear. So, in order for him to understand whether the music that he wrote was fine or not, he put his legs on the floor, and when he played the piano, he could feel, not hear, feel the vibrations from the piano. And in this way, he knew whether what he wrote was right or wrong, whether he liked it or not. We finished with the text, and now we have an after-reading activity, which means we're going to see now all the different forms of writing that we saw in the text. And then I want from you to tell me how is the person called that does all these pieces of writing, these forms of writing. Let's start with the first one. So, book review. How is the person that does the book review, that writes a book review? After the lesson, of course, you can refer back to the text and you can find also the name of that person that did it. So, book review is called, of course, a literary critic. So, the person that does the book review is called literary critic. Let's move on. Classical music. How is the person called? Of course, a composer. And I'm sure you can remember of Beethoven that we just referred to. Newspaper article. How is that called? The person that writes. In the very beginning, the first person that we saw. Yes, he is a journalist. So the journalist writes a newspaper article. The next one, novel. That's very easy. Who writes a novel? The novelist, of course. Play. The person that writes a play, it's called a playwright. It's easy. But be careful now with the way that the word is spelled. Poetry. The person that writes poetry is called a poet, of course. A screenplay or scriptwriter. How is the person called that does this? It's easy. Think of the word screen or script and we say he is a script writer. And song, of course, whoever writes the song is called a songwriter. Let's move on. And for homework, since we talked about music, we talked about art, we talked about theater, songs, films, I would like from you to think now of your favorite, either a track on an album, or a scene in a film, or an episode of a sitcom, like Friends, for example, that you really liked, that you really enjoyed, and I would like from you to write about it. Maybe you can find also some information about the people that wrote one of those three that you really like. And then feel free to express your feelings as well. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. I hope you found some information about art, music, theory, and we're going to meet next time. Take care. Goodbye.